Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this side event on reallocating space towards permanent infrastructure for active travel. So a side event organized back to back with the fifth high-level ministerial meeting on transport, health, and the environment organized by the PEP. So what we will be talking about today, let me just go to the next slide, is, as I said, the reallocation of space towards permanent infrastructure to boost active travel. And if cities want to embrace active travel indeed, and the health benefits that cycling and walking can bring to us, we really need to move away from the predominance of the private car in terms of space occupation in our cities and redistribute that space, which is scarce and which is valuable, more fairly in our city centers. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic clearly has brought an opportunity with all the temporary walking and cycling infrastructure that has been implemented across many cities in Europe and beyond. And it's also a topic that is high on the agenda of the Polis Network's Active Travel and Health Working Group. Polis is a European network of cities and regions working together on sustainable urban mobility and innovation. And my colleague Maria, who is also in this workshop, is leading on this particular working group. She's also involved in the Transport Decarbonization Alliance's Community of Interest on Active Travel, which is another group where this respacing movement is high on the agenda. So the purpose of this side event is really to gain insights into how cities have been reallocating space to promote active travel and how we can make the temporary interventions that we saw popping up during the pandemic permanent in time, making sure that we have safe and inclusive and better infrastructure for our cities in terms of cycling and walking. So how can we capitalize basically on the COVID-19 momentum that has been brought by us and further increase the share of active travel? But also, what challenges have we been facing along the way? What are the lessons learned as well? This is up for discussion during this workshop as well. So let me briefly present you the agenda. I will briefly hand over to my colleague Maria in a minute, who will be setting the scene to provide a framework in which we will be talking about reallocation of space. And then we'll be moving on to two presentations from experts in the field. Jill Warren from the European Cyclists Federation, the CEO, who will tell us a bit more about their tracker that they have developed, where they have really been taking stock of all the COVID-19 cycling measures that have been popping up across cities, and also draw some conclusions on the basis of that. Similarly, Sebastian Kraus, who is a researcher at the Mercator Research Institute on Global Commons and Climate Change, will be diving into the topic of the cycling infrastructure that we have seen pop up in our cities and how this really has had an impact also on cycling numbers. So that's very interesting, and we look forward to hearing more about his insights. And then we'll go on to the practitioners' experience from two of our member cities, the city of Berlin, which really was very much on the radar when it came to introducing these pop-up bike lanes, and also the city of Lisbon, where they have been reallocating space both for walking and cycling in the city. After that, we will take the four speakers together and have a panel discussion, and you as an audience are also very welcome to share your thoughts and post your questions in the chat, which I will then pass on to the panelists. So without any further ado, I would like to hand over to my colleague Maria, who will be giving you a couple of introductory statements to work with and to feed the discussion afterwards. Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Karen. Good afternoon, everyone. So yes, as we have seen since the COVID-19 outbreak, many city governments have undertaken measures to accommodate and to encourage increased cycling during the pandemic, such as protected on-road bike lanes, but also car-free streets, shared streets, and also reduced limits, among other measures. And the reallocation of some traffic lanes for walking and cycling was the most common mobility response. All over the world, we have seen how cities have quickly widened pavements and implemented pop-up bike lanes. Next, please. So, well, as we know, currently space in cities is disproportionately allocated to the movement and parking of private motorized vehicles due to decades of car-centric urban design and urban planning. And this crisis has brought in this specific sense, a unique opportunity to redistribute space in a more balanced way in favor of the soft modes, and this way to grasp all the well-known benefits that active travel can bring to cities and citizens. Next slide, please. So through this last year at Polis, we have been looking at the topic of space reallocation for active travel, supporting the exchange between cities to help them learn from each other and overcome common challenges. Infrastructure has been deployed in a very short time, and this posed many different challenges. We have discussed technical aspects, issues related to public opinion and safety concerns. We have learned about elements that have led to success, and we have also gathered with cities and experts to discuss the best ways forward. And also, as mentioned by Karen, in cooperation with the Transport Decarbonization Alliance Community of Interest in Active Travel, we have been looking at this topic from the perspective of cities, countries, and companies. Next slide, please. So, well, today is more than 1 year of deployments, experiments, challenges, and we would like to reflect on where we stand and what are the key issues that need to be taken into account to make sure we can grasp the opportunity that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought to reallocate space towards permanent infrastructure for active travel. The share of walking and cycling trips has risen in almost all cities during the COVID pandemic, but however, it is vital that governments at all levels support the expansion and improvements in infrastructure, programs and policies necessary to ensure cycling and walking thrive. And this also includes retaining and building on the successful measures implemented in 2020 to deal with COVID. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, yes, the purpose of today is to gain insights into how cities are reallocating space to promote active travel and how these measures can become permanent, safe, and inclusive. And this way to understand how we can capitalize on the COVID-19 momentum to increase the share of active travel. So we will take a look at the evolution of the emergency measures that have been put in place. We will explore the link between the deployment of infrastructure and the actual levels of cycling. And we will also hear about the practical experience of cities deploying infrastructure, as well as the challenges they have faced and the lessons they have learned. So back to you, Karen.
Thank you, Maria. So we'll be moving on now to our core speakers for today, and we will be starting the set of presentations with a presentation from Jill Warren. She's the CEO of the European Cyclists Federation, and as I said, they've really done some very interesting work in terms of keeping track of all the lovely cycling measures we saw popping up across cities in Europe. So Jill, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Karen. I will try to share my screen now. Let's see. It's trying to find my presentation and it's not finding it. I apologize for that. It's not finding it. Do you have my slides? Are you able to put them on? I'm very sorry, but it doesn't seem to pick up my slides on here.
I can take your presentation. Just a second.
Okay.
In
and
my...
I'll unshare. I'm very sorry about that. It won't. It doesn't find it in the.
Well, we've learned how to cope with the unexpected.
I found it. I found it. Sorry, I found it.
Is it there now?
There we go. I think so.
Okay.
Can you see it now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Apologies for that, everybody.
No problem.
Right. So I'm very happy to share thoughts from the cycling advocacy perspective on this. So I represent the European Cyclists Federation, as Karen said. Our mission is to achieve more and better cycling for all in Europe, and we promote cycling as a sustainable and healthy means of transport and leisure. So, next slide. So our activities and outputs include evidence-based advocacy, innovative research and thought leadership projects, the provision of tools, resources, and trainings, one of the tools being the COVID measures tracker, which will be part of the subject for today. We coordinate the Eurovelo Cycle Route Network, and we organize Velo City, the premier international planning conference on cycling, which we hope that all of you will want to sign up for if you haven't already, in Lisbon in September. So it's very well known that the pandemic helped to accelerate the cause for cycling. Citizens took advantage of empty streets in lockdown to cycle more, or to cycle for the first time, or to start cycling again. Cities recognized that they would go from lockdown to more traffic gridlock if everyone turned to their private cars to maintain social distancing in their daily mobility, and saw cycling as one of the solutions for that. So they quickly introduced pop-up cycle lanes, car-free streets, cycling streets, and other measures to encourage and enable more cycling. So ECF has been tracking these developments in Europe over the past year. On the one hand, we wanted to have a comprehensive picture of these unprecedented developments in Europe that quickly enabled more cycling. On the other hand, we wanted to have a good body of evidence we could use to lobby for more permanent infrastructure beyond the pandemic. Never waste a good crisis, as they say. So to date, nearly 2,600 kilometers of measures have been announced, and over 1,400 kilometers have been implemented. And we also tracked the amount of money that cities and countries have committed to fund COVID-related cycling measures. So far, this totals about 1.7 billion euros. So this figure captures not only the money allocated to providing temporary infrastructure, but also financial measures like bicycle purchase or repair premiums and vouchers. When we started tracking these developments, cities were making very bold announcements. Rome was to create 150 kilometers of pop-up cycle lanes, Brussels to repurpose 40 kilometers of roads for cycling, etc. But Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither was Brussels, and even a pop-up cycle path can take days or weeks to implement. So for that reason, and with the help of info provided or verified by our member organizations and other sources, we distinguished in our tracker between kilometers of infrastructure announced and kilometers actually implemented, the yellow line on the graph being announced and the blue line being implemented. Some headline figures: 42 out of the 94 biggest EU cities announced or implemented COVID cycling measures. 42 out of 89 of the biggest metropolitan cities from wider Europe announced or implemented COVID measures, and 17 out of 47 European capital cities announced or implemented such measures. This shows, in no particular order in the list, some of the standout cities that we tracked. The size of the dot on the map represents the volume of kilometers of cycling measures. So yellow being actually implemented and blue being announced. So what we found really interesting and encouraging is that a lot of cities doing these things are in countries that are not traditional cycling countries, at least not cycling countries in the sense of everyday travel. And these are the places that most of the growth in cycling needs to come from if we're going to reach the goal of doubling the levels of cycling by 2030 compared to 2017 levels, as is our stated goal. Another interesting thing is, I can't describe it super scientifically, but if you'll notice, there are some countries that have hardly any measures on the map, or only a few smaller ones. And these tend to be the countries that have much more restrictive rules around planning, and which made it very difficult to introduce this, I guess, if you like, test infrastructure. And so that's something I think we need to think about as well. So what can we learn from all of these living laboratories that were put together in Europe's cities? I think the most important question is, did it work? Did these measures actually increase the levels of cycling? And the answer is a resounding yes. A study led by my fellow panelist, Sebastian Kraus at MCC, found that the pop-up cycling infrastructure increased cycling levels in European cities by between 11 and 48% in the first months of the pandemic. I don't want to steal any of his thunder, so I'll let him tell you the rest of the good news about that in his presentation. But another important question is, how can we keep up the momentum to get more permanent, safe, and comfortable infrastructure for active travel like cycling? Well, firstly, it needs proper funding. We have been advocating for EU member states, for example, to include projects like this in their national recovery plans. So far, to our knowledge, 6 of them have included good cycling plans. The rest have much more room for improvement. Other sources of funding for certain types of cycling infrastructure projects include the EU structural funds, and we've recently issued guidance on navigating these, which you can find on our website. Secondly, national cycling strategies are very good ways to ensure the proper planning and funding for cycling infrastructure, and the same goes for sustainable urban mobility plans at more the city municipal level. So having the right guidance and specifications in terms of quality requirements is also very important. Thanks to our lobbying work the past few years, the Road Infrastructure Safety Management Directive provides for the development of such quality requirements at EU level. We are expecting the call for experts for the working group to develop these to be announced soon, so watch this space. We also need more know-how for building the right kind of infrastructure that is safe, coherent, direct, and comfortable. Cities in Europe are finding that such expertise is currently in short supply. There is a current skills gap. Finally, I would say we need more political will and courage. The political will to make our cities more livable, less polluted, and to enable our citizens to live healthier lifestyles through more active travel needs to be there. And it is there in a lot of places, but it could be stronger. And the courage to reallocate space away from cars and car parking spaces where cars sit idle 95% of the time and towards better space for people is something that will benefit all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gilles, for this very interesting overview, and we'll definitely continue on some of the conclusions you presented during the panel discussion afterwards. In the meantime, let me encourage the audience to post questions in the chat or through the Q&A, and we'll make sure to pick them up during the discussion afterwards. So as a second presentation, we'll be moving on to Sebastian, who has been announced by Gilles already because she was referring to the research that he has done. And that is showing some very interesting insights indeed, showing actually that when you invest in infrastructure, there is definitely an effect on cycling numbers. So Sebastian, we'd be curious to hear more about the research that you have done. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me and you can see my slides.
Yes, we can.
Thanks for the invitation to speak here, and thanks for Gilles for introducing our work already. Yeah, we tried to evaluate all this new infrastructure that has popped up all over Europe, and the ECF's COVID cycling tracker was instrumental in doing that. We couldn't have done it without them, and their data was a big asset to be able to evaluate this policy. This is a joint work with my co-author Nicholas Koch, and we're both based at the Mercator Research Institute in Berlin, where we evaluate climate policy and sustainability policy. Yeah, and the work is ended up in a paper that was published recently. I included the link to the paper on the last slide if you want to have a look. So what is the big question that we try to solve with this paper? It's, of course, did the pop-up cycling infrastructure work? But there's a bigger scientific question, of course, behind this, and it's what is first, the infrastructure or the cyclists? Does new infrastructure really induce cycling, or does the infrastructure just follow the cycling demand? And I mean, if you look at the raw data, then you see that there's a clear link between a higher cycling mode share and cycling infrastructure in terms of kilometers. But the question.
Sorry to interrupt, Sebastian, but we're still stuck on the first slide. I don't know if you've moved on to the next slides, but we still see the title slide.
Okay, it's not moving? No. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Now but it's not in presentation mode either, so it's not on slideshow. It's just. Yeah.
Let me go back into the. Do you see it now?
No, we still see it.
Okay.
We see not in slideshow, but.
Well, maybe I'll just use it like this.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. So basically, this is the chart I was just talking about. There's this clear link between the length of the cycling network and the mode share. but the question is really, is this what's first, you know, the infrastructure or the cyclists? And the problem with the existing literature was that, well, basically it often shows small elasticity. So elasticity is the reaction of cycling to new infrastructure, and it often shows small elasticities. And we think that's because often these models include just a lot of control variables. And often these control variables, in a sense, if you've already worked with regressions, you will know this. It will if you include a lot of control variables, it will just control away the effect. So there's nothing left for the variable you're interested in. So it's actually better if you can run a model without too many control variables. And that's something you can do. And when you have an experiment, you know, when you experiment, you don't need to control for so many factors. And I mean, there have been quite a few experiments and experimental studies, but often they are very small scale. And so they lack the statistical power to really measure a robust effect. And also you have the spillover problem. So you often have spillovers between different streets, right? Cyclists change their routes. And so it's really hard to find a good control group if you're experimenting at this small scale. So what would be perfect? A large scale fast experiment. And that's what happened last spring. The pop-up experiment really allows to zoom in on fast changes in many different cities. And so the typical way we evaluate this is we use a difference in difference model. This is basically the workhorse of policy evaluation. You have a treatment group and a control group or comparison group, and you compare them over time. So you see that you look before and after the treatment, and then basically the difference in difference, which is this, that's the treatment effect. And so the idea is, you know, if you do this on a person level, you have to find a good control or comparison group, and then you compare before and after. On a street level, for a street level intervention, you need to find similar streets as a comparison group, and then you compare before and after. And on a city level intervention, which was what happened now, is there you have to find good comparison cities, and then you compare before and after. In terms of why does this research design work? It's if you find a good counterfactual, then you can assume you find a good comparison. You can assume that this comparison group is on a parallel trend before. You can check that, and then you assume that that the comparison group stays on a similar trend after treatment. And if that is the case, then it's a good counterfactual, and you can really say the difference in difference is the treatment effect. Of course, you also have to assume that around the time of treatment, there's nothing else that happens that creates a lot of bias, so that this dotted line is actually not true. And in the absence of treatment, the city would have evolved on a different path. So this is what we used to evaluate this policy experiment. And basically, we looked at treated cities, so cities that built pop-up bike lanes, compared to other cities that didn't. And if you look at this very naive comparison, you see that before the treatment, basically cities were on a similar path. There's no difference in terms of cycling between these cities. And then after treatment sets in, the pop-up bike lanes are rolled out. You see that treatment cities go up. So there's a difference after treatment between treatment cities and control cities. So this is the very simple difference in difference design. And then what we do is we run a little bit more complex regression models, and we find that these changes in cycling, which are somewhere between 10% and 50%, they are very robust over a lot of different models that you can specify. And that's how we find that pop-up bike lanes had a massive effect. And importantly, we control out the effect that COVID increased cycling overall. So basically, that's something we control out by using the control group. You know, both were on a trend towards more cycling, and cycling increased with COVID. But that's something you control out, and then you're left with a difference in difference, which is the additional effect on cycling that is due to the pop-up bike lanes. So in terms of what I wanted to talk about, what the scientists have as a wish list for these type of interventions, it's that, yeah, of course, it would be good to have these type of interventions in many places to run macro studies to avoid the type of spillover problems you have when you only experiment at a small scale. Also think about evaluating when you roll out this infrastructure. I mean, ideally, you know, the gold standard of evaluation is to randomize an intervention, but often that's not possible. It's also sometimes difficult to argue for that politically. But what's also quite good is to create a score for prioritizing these type of interventions, or to create a cutoff, and then you compare cities or streets above a cutoff and below a cutoff. It's also good to build the counterfactual ex ante, because then you commit to a type of regression model and you can't change it afterwards anymore. So it's very hard to argue that you cherry picked your results. So that's also good to get people who work with econometrics or statistics on board to set up the evaluation before you roll out the policy. Of course, what's very, very useful is bike counter data. I mean, we had to pull all this bike counter data from the websites of different cities. It would be great to have this data at least on the open data portals of cities, and maybe even pull it together in one place. And of course, the holy grail would be to have GPS data from different modes. I mean, we sometimes work with car GPS data, but it would be nice to have GPS data that tracks people using different modes or changing from one mode to the other over time. That would be very interesting to see, because what we could see now was just an increase in the use in overall cycling, but we don't really know where these cyclists came from, right? And yeah, what I'll be up to in the coming months is to look at different outcomes, not only the increase in cycling, but also maybe increases in social capsule. You know, with all this GPS and mobile phone data, you can create new indicators for you know, connection between people and how much time people spend around their houses and in their neighborhoods. And I mean, there's also this hypothesis about, you know, Dutch kids being the happiest in the world because they can roam freely, and that would be something interesting to look at as well. The effects of new cycling infrastructure or traffic calming measures on people's happiness. Yeah, that's it from my side. Really sorry that the full screen mode didn't work. I'm happy to share the slides, and yeah, would be curious about your questions.
Thank you, Sebastian. Very interesting insights indeed, and we could very well read the slides, so no worries. So these two presentations have kind of set the scene and given us an overview of what has been happening across cities, but also what the impact of those interventions has been in terms of cycling numbers. Now we will dive into the details from the perspective of the cities themselves, and really come up with a practitioner's view. How has it been for Peter and Joao, respectively, to introduce these measures in favor of cycling and walking in Berlin and Lisbon, respectively? So we'll start with Peter, who really has been working hard over the last year, let's say, on the pop-up bike lanes in Berlin. And the great thing is, as well, is that they shared a kind of manual for other cities to follow their lead and their example. And with this crisis being unprecedented and with no roadmap for us to turn to, this peer-to-peer exchange has proven to be even more important than it already was in the past. And this is also something we've tried to facilitate from the side of Polis. Peter, tell us your story.
Yeah, hello everybody. I will give you a link later in my presentation to the guide you mentioned, which has not been made by us, but by Mobicon. I will leave some words about it. Yeah, my name is Peter. I'm working for the city of Berlin in the Senate Department for Transport, Environment and Climate Protection. And we did, together with the famous borough of Kreuzberg, some pop-up bike lanes within the last year. And we are now in the process of making them permanent, so I can tell kind of the full story now. What Sebastian did, what Jill did, was to paint a large picture, and I will dig now into a specific case. Just before we have, I have to change my here. Now the slides should change. This has been not a pop-up bike lane, but a protected bike lane, the first of its kind in Berlin at Hasenheide in Kreuzberg. And this is a kind of infrastructure that we are aiming at, that we want to have in basically all major streets in Berlin. And we do have a mobility act, kind of a mobility law, which forces us to build this kind of infrastructure on every single major street to the year of 2030. The problem is that we have the idea, we know how to build it, but we are just not fast enough. And the pop-up bike infrastructure is kind of an answer to that question. I show you a picture of the case I would like to show you today, which is a Cottbusser Damm in Kreuzberg. It's just some 100 meters away from the protected bike lane I've just shown you. And this is a very typical situation. I took this photo myself 2 years ago. Cottbusser Damm, we called it the beast because it's one of the most dangerous and uncomfortable streets in Kreuzberg. It connects to major places, and even as a cyclist, you had to use it because there was just no way around. And so there were a lot of cyclists on the street. A 3-lane street, parked cars on the right side, legally, illegally parked cars in the middle lane, and then the situation like this was like totally normal. And we came, before COVID, we came up with the idea to reallocate space on these streets, not by, what we Germans all normally do. We plan every single centimeter super accurate and then bring it to the street, but say, no, we have to take a shortcut. We have to reallocate space somehow, but temporarily, so that we can change it afterwards, after observation, etc. We evaluate our measures, and then we make it permanent. That should make it, like, the whole process way faster. And we tested it in some streets during the COVID crisis last year in March, April, and this was one of the streets. Next photo shows you the plans we were making for it. Yeah, those are like standard plans that we use a lot for standard situations, and we made them for pop-up infrastructure. We said, okay, we have standard streets, so we need standard solutions here. Mobile bollards, yellow lanes that we know from construction sites. And we said, okay, every single borough responsible for the street can use those standard plans, and they do not have to have like a planning office and years of planning, but use just the standard plans and apply them on the streets. We made them, and when we started to apply them at the Cottbusser Damm, this is a street I've just shown you before with this SUV. There's a Porsche passing by those cyclists, and this is what it looked like last year. It took us just 1 day and in total 1 week between deciding, yes, we want to change something here, and taking the picture here. It was a 1.7 kilometer street, which means both sides 3.4 kilometers. We just put those yellow lines on the street. We just put some mobile bollards on it, and this was actually just done in a day. The next day I went there with my camera and I took this photo, and there, you see the skater girl here, and I would bet all the money I have that she would have never ever chosen this way before. That's why I like this photo, even though it's not allowed for her legally to skate on a bike lane, but she feels it's a safe space for her. And that's what makes this important for us. What we have here is, I would admit, not very beautiful, but it gives us, in a planning process, it gives us the opportunity to observe, to evaluate, to see what happens here. Are we right? Do we have to change something? Do we have to make it broader or whatever? Like, we come from a theory to the praxis. We do it on the street, reallocate space, and then we observe, and then we decide what we do, like as a permanent measure. We had an increase on these based on Strava data, which are not very accurate, I admit, but we have an increase of cycling there around 100% last year in September compared to September 1990. This is we just applying a simple measure, I would say. This is another picture of a pop-up bike lane, which I like very much. It's the same as before. We have 2 kids there. This was the first pop-up bike lane we did in Berlin. we had a 3-lane road, which was basically an inner city autobahn, very fast driving cars, no bicycle infrastructure at all. And we just took away the right lane. And I went there the Sunday after we did it, and the first thing I saw were these 2 kids cycling there, even without parents. And I saw it the same as like with the skater girls. So they would have never ever chosen this way before, and now they feel like safe there. They cycle there. It was unthinkable that kids cycle on that road before. Even I felt very uncomfortable there and tried to avoid that road. So simple measure, big effect on people. This, for those who may know Berlin a bit, gives you some insights. We have here, I don't know if you see my cursor, but we have here like an inner circle of the city, and we closed the gaps that were still there without any bicycle infrastructure by putting pop-up bike lanes there. So it was not just opportunity, but we had a plan. It was like in total about 25 kilometers, and we will still apply some more pop-up bike lanes this year, because we found this is a new measure that we have, which helps us to reallocate space very much faster than before. This is a screenshot of a YouTube video which went viral. This is a Cottbusser Damm, the same street as I've shown you before. And the driver said, okay, I just cannot pass here anymore. The cycle lane leads to congestion and traffic jams, and this is an emergency problem because I, as an emergency vehicle driver, cannot pass here anymore. This was the first difficulty and obstacle that we were facing after applying it. The second one was the delivery zones. Here you can see on the right lane, there are supposed to be delivery zones. They're not really working, but this was a problem for the local shop owners who said, well, I can't get my delivery done anymore. So this was, I would say, the big obstacles that we were facing. And we thought about how to solve them. And the solution was basically very easy. We just made the bike lane broader. This is a photo I've taken just yesterday. We are not ready yet, but this is a final solution that you can see here. Same street, Cottbusser Damm. We just made the bike lane a bit broader. We have now around 3 meters between the board and the protection elements that you can hear on the right side, those small black and white ones. This is 3 meters, so emergency vehicles can drive there. In case of emergency, they can just take that lane, and they will be very, very much faster than ever before because there will not be any traffic jam. Maybe you have seen some of those videos of an emergency vehicle trying to pass a critical mass. It's very impressive how fast cyclists, even big groups of cyclists, can create a safety lane, can provide space, or an emergency vehicle can pass by. What you see here, as I said, is a final solution. We have this is about 250 in total, 3 meters. So it's easy, even if there's a cargo bike, to pass by as a cyclist. And here on the right side, where you can still see then there will be 1 lane left for cars. This is a classic example of reallocating space without any bigger measures. It's just basically just those bollards, those protection elements, and white lanes, nothing more. So 2 more links, then I'm finished. This is a Mobicon guide, which has been mentioned. It's been translated in Portuguese and Spanish and French and whatever. So in case you want to apply it in your own city, please download it. And on the right side, there's a link to a photo gallery with a lot of pop-up bike lane photos I took by myself last year. They can be used under Creative Commons license. And this is my last slide. I say thank you for your attention. It's just one sentence about the slides is Danke is German for thank you. And this has been put there by neighbors because they were so happy that we finally put a bike lane on this very hard street. And the gold medal on the left side is a prize that we gained by the Federal Ministry of Transport last week in the category of infrastructure. It's a German cycling prize, whatever. But it shows exactly that it's seen all over Germany. So 11 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Peter, and congratulations with the prize. Very well deserved, I would say. And then to see the gratitude of the users of the new infrastructure like that is, of course, also very satisfying, I can imagine. Now let's move on to the second concrete case that we'll learn more about, and that's the city of Lisbon and how they have also been reallocating space, not just for cyclists, but also for pedestrians. João, the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much for inviting Lisbon. I was just trying to share my presentation, but I think I'm having the same problem as Jill. It's not appearing. I don't know, it's just a matter of waiting a few seconds.
I scrolled up further and it worked because I think it goes to the middle of the stuff you have open. And if you scroll up, maybe it's there.
Yeah, it's a matter of finding the right screen to share, I think. And maybe closing some screens.
It doesn't appear. It doesn't appear. It only appears online content, so I don't know.
And there's no other tab that you can select? Ah, we see it now.
I've shared it, so if I can go through the slides, João.
Ah, okay. Thank you, Maria.
Because, can you see the presentation?
Yeah, we see it, but is it now Maria sharing or is it you? I lost track.
Maybe me. It's on full screen.
It's in PDF, not on full screen.
No, it's Maria.
So shall we take it from Maria's screen then?
Yeah.
Okay for you, João, or you prefer to try to share it?
Let me just see if I... Can you see this?
Well, now we still see Maria's screen, so maybe she has to stop sharing first.
Sorry for that.
I stopped.
I don't know. Yeah, doesn't appear. Sorry. Maria, if you could share.
Yes, no problem.
I did some last minute changes, so I will lose that, but let's go from there. So thank you very much for inviting Lisbon to share our experience. Just one quick note, we have to update the number of kilometers that we built because we did more than it was on Jill's presentation. So we are a little bit more, we have a little bit more than we had. But mainly, I don't know if you can go, Maria José, if you can, please go. Yeah, just a brief presentation of Lisbon. So for you who don't know as well, it's we have like 500,000 people living in the city, 2.8 million in the metropolitan area, and we are investing a lot in the last decade to become a healthier, greener and more active city. We earned last year the Green Capital Award, which was a recognition of our effort. And we are working in having much more people riding their bikes and also promoting walking. So go ahead. So this is where we started. We have a lot of car use in the city. 46% of all trips are done by car. And if you go to the metropolitan area, it's 60%, which shows the dependency of car usage in the metropolitan area. So our goal is to have at least 2/3 of the whole trips, daily trips, done by some green mode, like public transportation or walking or cycling. So that's our goal, and that's where we want to go. Go ahead. So we have two programs that we speed up. One is Lisbon Ciclável, which means cyclable Lisbon. Go ahead. And why does it make sense to invest in cycling also in a city like Lisbon, which is known as the city of the seven hills? Because most of the city is quite flat or easily bikeable. We have a lot of trips, daily trips, that are done with less than 5 kilometers, and 32% of those trips are done by car. So we have a lot of trips that we could change and have this modal shift to other means, mainly bicycle or walking. And we have still a lot to grow. So go ahead. Go ahead, another one. I already talked about the slopes. So because bicycle is an efficient alternative, as you saw, but also an inclusive and equitative one. So everyone or almost everyone can use a bike and can have access to a bike. It's quite cheap. The municipality also created a municipal funding to help people buying their own bikes. So from conventional ones to electric and cargo bikes. So we have a big program, 3 million euros dedicated to that. But also when you create more space, when you take space from car, people even on a wheelchair feel safe to use that channel, that space that you regain from car. So go ahead. But even families with kids. So our strategy is based on cycle network, bike parking, this funding I told you, and local programs, and we are following this strategy. Go ahead. And regarding bicycle network, we want to build. We have this goal to double our bicycle network, mainly to give people an alternative to use an alternative from car use. So all ages and abilities, segregated bike lanes, safe network, and to connect people where people live and where people study or work. So go ahead. So this was our plan already before March 2020. So we were already doing this. The thing is, with the pandemic, we had the opportunity to build it faster, to make it faster, and that was, I think, the change that we did. So all the process of building a bike lane is really complicated, and because we don't know, we not only do a bike lane, when we start the construction, we look at the sidewalk and to public lighting and to everything. So we look to the public space, and that turns the process a little bit more complicated. So we saw an opportunity with COVID to make it faster. So we had the plans, we had some projects, and we adapted to make it easier to build. So we designed these 6 main axes, and we tried to push it as much as we can during this process. So go ahead. This is a few examples. Can go through another one. And this is some examples of pop-up bike lanes that we did, mainly paint and bollards. Berlin was an inspiration for us. We did our own manual. We saw yours, of course. It was an inspiration, but we adapted because our streets are not standard. We have narrow streets. We have a lot of problems and local situations that we need to adapt the solutions. So of course we try to keep it simple and try to roll out some bike lanes in order to have more people using it. Go ahead. Just a few more examples, as you see. But then we in the middle of the process we try to make things a little bit to improve the design a little bit, and we put some more permanent elements. So in the pop-up bike lanes, the first ones, we didn't had this advanced zone for the bus stop. We built that. We started to build that during the process, so we keep the bus stop accessible, which is important. One of the things that we are building much more two-way bike lanes than one-way. And when you do that, you need traffic lights. So in most of the intersections, so you start to have this going from temporary to permanent during the process was one of our issues. So go ahead. But even though, as you see, this is one of our examples. We still have a lot of car space, so we are just taking a little bit of car space, and try to give to some other mode, which is bicycle. Go ahead. So the other program that I will try to quickly address is a Rua é Sua, which means the street is yours. It started as a program. Go ahead. Started as a program started as an event. It was an event. We closed the main street, the main avenue in Lisbon, Avenida Liberdade, and made an event with concerts and fairs and stuff like that. With the COVID, we stopped doing it, and we changed the program to open street for pedestrians and closing for car traffic. Go ahead. So it is a set of interventions made with the local parish, and it's mainly to give space to people, to help local businesses and local shops to have their own terrace outside the door, and it's important also to keep the social distancing and create more conditions, more space for people to walk. Go ahead. So I'll just show you a few examples. So regarding the parklet terraces, we call esplanadas. We have more than 345 applications. So we are taking, in most of these cases, a car parking to create a new space for a terrace of a shop. Go ahead. Just a few examples. Go ahead. And in some streets, we took the cars and gave the street to pedestrians and to the local shops to build this terrace, which is very important during these COVID times, because people are more willing to stay outside than inside, and there were a few restrictions for a few weeks. People only the terraces were open, and this was a way to help local businesses also to go through this crisis. So a few examples, a few more. As you see, I prefer the after, as I'm sure you all agree. This is an example. So this is just paint and space. So I will just finish with this, in my opinion, one of the most impacting interventions that we did, which is around the space around Mercado de Arroz, which is a local market, fresh market. Go ahead, please. So just this is what we had: a lot of car parking, illegal car parking, a lot of space in the crossings. A lot of the sidewalks were quite narrow. So go ahead. We had just so the intervention was mainly to have more safety in those streets, to narrow the pedestrian crossings, to have to make it more regular the parking. Go ahead, please. So this is the situation you can go through, and this is what we had. Go ahead. So you see car parking on the sidewalk. And then we create this ring around the market, which have also car parking, but parklets, more the loading docks for the business people of the market. Go ahead. But mainly, go ahead, another one, please. But this is the main intervention. We took space with paint. We had a street art intervention, and we took that space where people just put the cars, blocking everything, making more dangerous all the crossings. We took that and regained the space for pedestrians. So pedestrians for terrace, etc. Go ahead. And this is how it goes. So with a beautiful design, and yeah, so this is now an iconic place in the city of Lisbon, and it's temporary, but it's really beautiful. So, and I finish.
Thank you, João. Looks beautiful, and it's a street for people, that's clear, and a city more and more for people instead of for cars. And I hope we can all continue on this avenue and really lock in the temporary interventions and make them permanent over time. That's what we should see happening. As we all know, the respacing of our city streets was long overdue anyway. But also what we've seen is that both in the case of Berlin and Lisbon, you had these plans already prior to COVID-19, which has helped you tremendously also to accelerate the process, and is also increasing the likelihood of these interventions to stay in place. There is a question, I have a couple of questions from the chat, which we will start with to kick off the panel discussion. A question from Madrid, Jill, whether they have been taken into account in your tracker. Do you have any idea?
Yes. So the list of cities I put on that one slide was relatively arbitrary. I just took the ones that were standout cities to us for different reasons, not only necessarily because of the number of kilometers. It could also be because they either implemented a speed limit that helped enable more cycling and walking in certain areas, or purchase premiums or things like that. So did we consider Madrid? Yes, absolutely. So the sources that we had for the tracker were very often news reports, reports from our members, and a combination of that we then fact-checked through a large network of over 60 members in over 40 European countries to try to make sure we were getting as much stuff as possible. It is possible that with some of the more obscure languages where we don't have a native speaker in our team, that we might have missed the one or the other thing, but something like Spanish, I'm pretty sure we have the things in our tracker. But again, if there's anything anybody notices is missing in there that should be, let us know. And we were pretty strict about, is that a COVID-related measure or not? So it kind of had to have relevance to that and be announced by the city in that way to be in there.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. Also coming back on what you mentioned in terms of announced interventions versus actually implemented interventions, related to a question posted by Jamie. So do you see that there were plans which were announced and then afterwards cancelled, or is it just a matter of, taking some more time to implement them? And what was the reason for not going ahead, for example?
Yeah, I think mostly it's the time lag between announcement and actual implementation. And sometimes, again, that fact checking that it could be that the implementation is a bit further. We just haven't had the information from our sources or our members or other people on the ground. So there could be a bit of that in there. I think what you mentioned before, which is very much the case in a lot of cities, that they already had plans and they were able to accelerate them to implement this temporary infrastructure, is very important. So that not only increases the chances that it will become more permanent, but also helps with not having them canceled, if you like, in that sense. And we saw that over and over again, that there were plans, they had a general idea where should these lanes be put, and were able to move very quickly.
Okay, great. So what we also know is that urban space is scarce and therefore very valuable, but it's a very powerful tool that cities have in their hands in terms of, prioritizing modes or not prioritizing other modes. We also know that because of this scarcity and the fight for public space, that it can be very sensitive to take space away from a certain mode. And in this case, the predominant modes, unfortunately, still in our cities, and that's the private car. So I would like to turn to Lisbon and Berlin to see whether you have met with opposition as well. We've seen the grateful citizens putting up signs in Berlin, and we know that experimenting is a powerful way to win the hearts and minds of people. But we've also heard about opposition and complaints, and even cities being taken to court. So maybe starting with you, Peter, can you tell us a bit more about the struggles in that field and how you are trying to overcome them?
I would say we're trying to overcome them, but we don't have a final solution yet. And I mean, we all can agree that reallocating space large scale in cities changes a lot, and this leads to a lot of fear and anger by people. We cannot do it without any conflict. We cannot take everyone into the boat. It just won't be working. We had a conflict with the delivery zones. I just saw a question in the chat about that. And that's the issue that we have to face. It's simple to say, hey, you live in the city center and you do not need any car. But it's not easy to say, hey, you do not need any truck to deliver your goods to your shop. So what we did, we basically increased the number of delivery zones, of legal delivery zones, but we decreased a lot the number of illegal delivery zones because we took away the second lane. Before, there was just no legal way for the shop owners to get their goods, but it was okay for them because it was an illegal way, the second lane. And we have a big problem when it comes to imposing traffic laws, especially when it comes to parking. So everyone parks where they want to, and there's, the fee you get is like nothing. And we have the same problem with the delivery. And shop owners and everyone says, okay, it's about the bike lane, but it's not about the bike lane. It's about the illegally parked cars in the delivery zone. So what we are trying to do, we took away the Cottbusser Damm, the example I showed you, we took away 250 parking spots permanent there within a day, and that's a lot. But what we also did, we had some flyers, and there's a local parking, like a parking building on the next street, and we took some flyers and put them on every parked car there and say, hey, we got a special offer for you for the next 3 months, 20 euros a month. You can get a space in this parking building. And it was just 20 people who took that offer. But we gave them an alternative. That was very, very important. We did not say, we don't care what you do with your cars, please sell it. But we said, okay, you have an alternative. You cannot complain anymore because it's just 20 euros a month. And the question we all have to face is how to deal with the people living on the street. We don't do those bicycle lanes for the people who live there, but for the people who want to pass there. But when we ask for a public hearing, for example, just the neighbors come and they say, that's my parking spot. And those people who will have a proper way to go to the office every day, they won't come to these public hearings. And that's a problem that we have. And we do not solve it with online tools, not yet. So it's still a big question there.
Joao, turning to Lisbon, have you met with opposition as well, and how are you trying to deal with that?
Of course, it's not possible to do this without some opposition. But I think the cities have their own timing, so it's by definition it's slowly. So cities transform it takes time to transform a city. And what we did was to create a lot of a big network. We built more than 20 kilometers in 1 year. So that's a very quick transformation for a city like Lisbon. But we had the same issues with delivery zones, with the parking, with emergency vehicles. But Most of the network was, I would say, built without any major issues. We have just one, which is more, it has more maybe public opposition, and we did the pop-up bike lane, and then we evaluated, we talked with people, and we are now changing to a different solution. We had a two-way bike lane. We just changed it to two one-way bike lane. And by that way, we are making we think we are making some improvements because I think it will be better both for cycling and for car drivers. But on that street particularly, the emergency vehicles, what we saw with the pop-up bike lane, they had more. They were they went there quicker than without. So we saw when we didn't make the bike lane on the entire street. Mm-hmm. So we can see where you have the pop-up bike lane. They can move faster than when you don't have it. So the thing is sometimes also this kind of solutions that creates a clear way. It helps also this kind of emergency vehicles to move faster. Mm-hmm. In some cases, in many cases, we took a car lane. So in most of the bike lanes we took a car lane. But in some cases, that car lane was already taken by car parking, illegal car parking.
Yeah.
So, but people don't take that as a problem. But once you create a bike lane, it suddenly starts to be one.
Okay, I would like to turn to Sebastian now, picking up on what the cities have just said. I can imagine that performance evaluation, which you also mentioned as an important topic, can also give additional arguments in terms of keeping a certain intervention and showing that actually the effects are overall positive. Do you have some kind of tips and tricks that you could share with cities in terms of better evaluating also the actual impact of infrastructure interventions?
Yeah, so what I can really recommend cities is to start counting before, right, and find a good control group. So so you should find, if you do an intervention on a street, you should find comparable streets and then count there before you intervene, and then you can do the simple difference in difference setup. That's something you can do in an Excel sheet just by counting cars and pedestrians and cyclists before and after. What you can also use to do this stuff on a larger scale is to use GPS data. I mean, especially in the German context, that's very useful because you have to, you sort of have to get an evidence base before you put up new infrastructure and say, how many cars do we count here? How fast do they drive? And that's something that takes time and money to do these things manually, or to get some engineers to count. And with new GPS data, some of this stuff can be automated, and so that's something you can use. And in general, as soon as you have this type of rich data, you can also, I mean, in some places you have it's very easy to prove that actually car speeds, I mean, car fluidity actually goes up when you put in new cycling infrastructure. I mean, it's actually very exciting to start discussing this based on evidence rather than feelings. Yeah.
And coming back to a question that I see in the chat, we have been talking a lot about cycling, and cycling tends to always take all the attention, but we are, of course, are also talking about walking, and we saw some interesting interventions in Lisbon. In your work, in your research work, Sebastian, have you also been looking into walking interventions and infrastructure changes, or are you planning to? I saw you are also going to look into the 15-minute city concept, which is really gaining ground as well, luckily, across Europe. Any views on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very, very, very interesting thing. You can also use GPS data for. And you can basically see, for example, that people spend more time in their neighborhood. I mean, there's some indicative data on that already, but that's something cities can do, right? I mean, there's data providers, and of course, not all the data providers are great in terms of the privacy protection they ensure. But I think that's something cities could start using to prove that, you know, basically people, they don't have to drive anywhere anymore. They can just spend time in their neighborhood, and that's something you can see on a large scale very cheaply because this data is available.
Mm-hmm. We're talking about proximity when we talk about the 15-minute city. Joao, you showed how many of the trips below 5 kilometers are still being driven by or taken by car. So there's still a lot of untapped potential. But now we also see that actually the typical 5-kilometer range of cycling, that we can go beyond that with the boom of the e-bike. Jill, any observations in terms of how popular the e-bike is and where you see also further opportunities in that respect for cycling and e-cycling?
Yeah, well, it's a huge game changer, and you know, anyone who's looked at the sales figures has seen that they've absolutely exploded. And I think that when we talk about the wider picture of what we're doing to make transport greener, we hear a lot about electrification. But when people say electrification, they usually mean you know, motorized transport being electric vehicles. And I would really like to see more people follow the recent example of France and offering a scrappage premium that you can apply to e-bikes, for example, because being the game changer that they are, they absolutely have the potential to replace these car trips and should be supported and subsidized accordingly. Mm-hmm. So we want to see much more of that.
And infrastructure, of course, is important. And we also see more and more these long distance supercycle highways popping up, which I think also provides great opportunities for the e-bike and in terms of shifting the incoming commuter traffic, which is a high burden on cities, away from the car and onto the e-bike. I saw, Joao, in your presentation, you were also mentioning an e-bike sharing scheme. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yep. As I stated, Lisbon has a lot of, although we have a big part of the city which is flat or easily bikeable, we still have some slopes and it's e-bikes make the change. So we started in 2017. A bike share system, which was 2/3 e-bike and 1/3 conventional one, but people just choose the e-bikes, so they preferred it, and we are trying to double the program now. We have around 84 stations. We intend to have 80 more until the end of the year, mainly e-bikes. And that's a way to make people experiment, to test the city, to test themselves, to see how the city become flatter with an e-bike. That's the big change. Another thing is the program that we have, the funding, also help people to buy more e-bikes. So that's from our data, we saw much more people using e-bikes on October 2020 than they used to, and one of the reasons could be the help that the municipality is giving to people to invest in a more expensive bike, but it's a game changer for a city like Lisbon.
Okay, sounds good. We have come to the end of this session, unfortunately. I'm sure we could go on and talk about cycling and walking for a very long time. What I take from this panel and from the presentations is that we have reasons to be optimistic, and I think we need optimism in dark times like these, even though hopefully there is now finally light at the end of the tunnel as well. So let me conclude this session by also promoting both the City of Lisbon and the European Cyclist Federation's Velocity, which will be up for its next edition in September. So we very much hope to see you there as well, of course. So thank you to all the speakers for their very interesting presentations and for engaging in the discussion. Thank you to the audience for posting interesting questions as well. And this is definitely not the end of the conversation. We'll continue to take stock of what is happening, encouraging our cities as well to accelerate this giving the streets back to the people movement that we have seen and that we very much welcome. So thank you for your attention and see you around.